Topic 2, part 2. So we just talked about the history of policing, and now I'm going to give you a little primer of contemporary policing. Essentially, what this video is going to be about is just talking about what does policing in America look like today. Oops daisy. Okay, and click. There we go. All right. So there's 3 basic features that we're going to cover throughout this video. And those features are that the police are predominantly controlled by local governments or city governments. It's most of policing happens on a local context. So if you think about it, like if you were to drive from Oswego, New York, all the way to New York City, the Big Apple, and you were to drive back roads, so instead of driving on the highway, you're just driving back roads. Think of how many different color police cars you would see on the way. Or even if you drove on the highway, right? You might see different police vehicles along your way, right? You might see some state police vehicles. You might see some random county in New York, and then when you get into New York City, you might see some NYPD folks. Or right as you're leaving Oswego, you might see some, maybe even Oswego University Police, some county sheriffs, and then you get through Syracuse, you see some police over there, right? So what I'm trying to say is that most police agencies in the United States are controlled on a local level, and that's why you see so many cops everywhere. We also should see policing as an industry. It really is an industry, okay? It's not just the policing that you see as a civilian, right? You have private policing, you have federal policing, state policing, county policing, special districts policing. It's really an industry. Let's think about pizza for a second, because I love pizza. Even though I don't eat a lot of animal products, I do enjoy me some pizza. Let's think for a second, right? You have the big 3 sort of fast food pizza companies right now, right? And in my opinion, that is Papa John's, Domino's, and Pizza Hut. But even those 3 predominant pizza companies aren't exactly the same. I'd say Domino's and Papa John's are very similar to each other. But then you have Pizza Hut, not quite as good. However, they got that stuffed crust shenanigans that is amazing. And no one else can seem to pull it off, and I don't know why. But then also, Pizza Hut has got that, the wing thing, right? They got that wing street stuff that's pretty damn good for being a pretty cheap pizza brand, right? But that's one form of pizza. But then there's also like the mom and pop pizza places, right? The pizza's all usually really good. It's so greasy, you gotta dab it with a napkin, right? Or if you're where I'm from, Evansville, Indiana, they have this nasty thin crust pizza, which is so gross. I'm so happy to be out of that pizza market, right? But you get like the mom and pop stores, very expensive. They seldom have really good, buy 3 for $5, whatever deals, right? But it's still, the ingredients are way better. It tastes way better, but it's not quite as cheap. Then there's like Little Caesars coming straight out of nowhere, which is all about carryout, right? That's how I survived in college, was their $5 carryout special. But then at the same time, you have this new burgeoning part of the pizza market, which is those quick fire pizzas, right? You go to the stores, Spinfire is one. There's it's like those little pizza places you go and you tell them what toppings to put on. It's a little small 10-inch pizza, and they put it in that little brick oven for like 90 seconds, and bam, it's ready to go, right? Those personal pizzas. That's like a thing now. And those are, or you can go to some restaurants which are just pizzerias, right? And those pizzas or whatever. And then you got like Chuck E. Cheese, and then Cece's, which is like a pizza buffet, which tastes like cafeteria pizza. But it's cheap, and if you're really trying to smash some za, that's where you go. Nonetheless, when I say pizza industry, right, you got to ask some qualifying questions after that. If I'm like, yo, I love pizza, whoa. What kind of pizza do you like? Do you like thin crust? Do you like Brooklyn style? Do you like this ridiculous cake deep dish style that they have in Chicago, which will give you a freaking heart attack after one slice, right? But then there's also questions like, wait, are we talking like Domino's cheap pizza here, or are we talking like mom and pop delicious pizza, right? You can't just say pizza. While pizza is pizza, it is not. You got to ask some questions afterwards. And the police you should look at the same, right? Yeah, most of police is like Domino's and Papa John's, right? Most police is patrol. But then there's municipal police, and you have state police, and then you have federal agencies. Then you have certain federal agencies that focus just on certain things, right? Then you have special districts police, like think about the SUNY Oswego campus police, right? That's like they're like the little mom and pop store that only sells deep dish pizza, right? I don't know. So when you think of the police, it's not just that picture that comes in your mind of someone in a uniform with a copper badge and a gun. And then our system is fragmented. Now, I'm not saying that as like a critique or whatever. It is what it is. It's fragmented. Again, because of the local control, because certain police agencies deal with certain things, it is fragmented, right? You have your special jurisdictions. Each county has its own jurisdiction. Some cities have their own jurisdiction. States have their jurisdictions, and federal have their jurisdictions. And because of that, there are some good things and some bad things that come from it, right? Where I grew up in South Africa for the first 15 years of my life. I lived in South Africa, which also explains my funny name. But there you just had one monolithic police agency called the South African Police Service. And there were some drawbacks and benefits to there just being one police agency that did all of the tasks, right? And one thing that actually ended up happening in South Africa is there's this growing market for private police, which is something we'll discuss later in this video. So if you want to look at the American law enforcement industry, here you can see the overall, what it looks like. I made this little flowchart thing for you. So you have government agencies in the United States, and you have private agencies in the United States. Among the government ones, you have local, state, federal, special districts. An example of special districts can be colleges, but there are other things as well, like the DC Metro Police. We'll talk about that a little later. And then the majority of policing is here in the local, right? I think there's about like 18,000 local police agencies in the United States. I could be wrong, but I think it's 18,000 at the moment. And you can either have a municipal agency, so that is a city. So where I lived before I came to New York, I lived in a town called Evansville, Indiana, where they had the Evansville Police Department. And then right outside of Evansville, they were in the county of Vanderburgh. And so they also had the county sheriff. So, but both of those are local, right? They're controlled by either a city council or a mayor or a county council or county government. Then you have state police, right? We all have seen New York State Police or whatever, wherever. Maybe you're from a different state, some states' police. And then you have the federal policing. So the most common federal police agency that you can think of is probably the FBI, and then special districts. But then on the private side, right, you have security guards, right? You've all seen those security guards standing somewhere acting all cool, thinking they're the bee's knees. And then you have private security firms like ADT. In South Africa, you have private security firms like ADT that also have their own patrol units. So they have like, so, you know, you buy your own security system for your house. But in South Africa, an added service to that is to have your own patrol near your house, in your little neighborhood. So usually what happens is you'll have these communities or HOAs. They will actually, part of their HOA fees or their gated community fees, whatever you want to call them, is to pay what they call armed response in South Africa, which is like your own personal security patrol, right? Because the police in South Africa does not have a great reputation for being effective, or at least that's the perception. So what happened in South Africa is that people lost so much patience with the government-funded police that they just started shelling out their own cash for their own police. And the police here in America need to be careful because they're asking to lose a lot of their money. They're asking to lose a lot of resources with the way that they're behaving. Sorry about my little soapbox. I had an apple. Okay, so fragmentation is good in that it allows local jurisdictions to deal with their own local problems, right? One of the things that is difficult, and I understand this is the case with people in some of the more rural parts of New York, is that they feel they don't have so much of a voice because the city folk in New York City are sort of drowning out. They're applying things that might work in New York City to the rest of the state. Now, whether that's actually true or not, I'm not gonna comment on that. But the thing is that there might be certain problems in Oswego County that might not exist in the city of Syracuse, right? So if you have one monolithic police agency and you're saying we're fighting methamphetamine, but there's not a methamphetamine problem in Oswego, then you're wasting resources. So the nice thing about fragmentation is it allows you to focus on the problems that are impacting your own community. And if you were to think back on the way back when human beings first decided to start living together, coming up with rules and deciding how to make sure those rules are followed, that is how it happened. It happened on that very local, very specialized community setting. So fragmentation makes sense in that particular context. However, there are problems with fragmentation. And I talked about this a little bit in my serial killing class or criminal profiling class, is that crime doesn't respect your jurisdiction, right? Criminals aren't going to be like, okay, well, you know what? I want to make it easy for the Oswego County people. So what I'm going to do is commit all my crimes in Oswego County, right? So that if they catch me, then they don't have to worry about talking to anyone or anything like that. I'm going to make it nice and easy for the police. That's not how it works. People commit crime all over the place. And especially when it comes to like serial killers, and this was especially the case before the Patriot Act, or before 2001, right? The Patriot Act, essentially what it did is it made it easier for different jurisdictions to communicate with each other. Nonetheless, in the 1970s and 80s, when serial killers were just like, it was like the prime time for serial killing in this country. And it was mainly because you might murder someone very violently in one jurisdiction, drive 6 counties over, do the same thing there, and those counties never talk to each other. It's like they never knew those crimes happened. And it wouldn't be until the news would sort of bring some of these things to light that other news agencies would say, that other police agencies would say, oh, wait, that murder looks just like this murder. And then they realize, holy moly, we have a freaking serial killer on our hands. Then there's also the argument that crime might displace. So you might have one city who has a lot of money because their mayor and city council decide to give a lot of money to that police. They give a lot of resources, but that might not be the case at a neighboring city or jurisdiction. And so because the city with better resources might drive crime out faster, you might say, well, now the criminals are just going to go into the next jurisdiction and commit crime there. So you're displacing crime. Now, while that is a logical argument, most research shows that crime displacement, when it does occur, is very minimal. And the reason for that is routine activities of place, right? Some of you might know what routine activities theory is, but essentially, to break it down real quick, routine activities theory is there's three ingredients that come together for crime to exist, and that is someone who wants to commit a crime, someone to kill or stab, or a joint to smoke, or something to steal, a suitable target, something that motivated offender is going to target, and then lack of a capable guardian, or lack of someone to stop that person from doing it. So when you have those three ingredients together, you have a perfect situation for crime. Now, what routine activities of place says, that certain places make it easier for motivated offenders to find suitable targets in the lack of capable guardians. So think about a place where you've lived where there was never any crime. Why do you think that was? So you might be able to drive crime out of your city by doing hotspots policing, which increases capable guardians. But if there's not any places where those three ingredients can exist in the next county or in the next jurisdiction, the crime will not displace there, because no one's going to commit crime where they know they're going to get caught. The problem also is, right, let's say you have a bunch of counties right next to each other, and they each have their own 911 service, they each have their own academies, they each have their own bomb squad, right? That gets really expensive, especially if you have like a really small county that only has like 10 police officers. Why are you running your own police academy, right? So it can be duplication of services, right? And also, you might have significantly different standards across different agencies. Think about that for a second, right? It might be like, who here has transferred from one university to another and you realize, oh, wow, I had it way easy where I transferred from, right? Same deal. Some police agencies just don't deal with a lot of crime, and so the standards are lower, right? They might express a little more discretion, or they might have a less diverse population. So what some police agencies have done is consolidate, right? Now, this depends on place, right? So in Charlotte, they had the Mecklenburg County Sheriff and Charlotte PD, and so they merged together because Charlotte made up such a large portion of that area anyways. It made sense to do so. But there are some areas where that would not be a good idea. So it just depends on the jurisdiction. But what a lot of agencies do now to address that duplication of services is that they will contract out jails and detention centers. So let's talk about municipal police for a second. They make up most of police agencies. They make up about 70% of police agencies, right? They employ about 60% of all sworn police officers, right? Cities, so city police agencies, deal with more crime than pretty much everyone else does because, I mean, think about it for a second. A city is a very small location with a boatload of people living in it. And if you remember what we learned from Durkheim, if you take a bunch of people who have different norms, different cultural beliefs and values, and you stick them in a small space, those people are going to start expecting each other's, or they're going to start evaluating other people by their own cultural standards, right? Which opens up for more room for conflict. And when there's that there's that room for friction and conflict there, a consequence of that can be criminal activity, or at least deviance, right? So it makes sense. Also, you get major discrepancies in socioeconomic status in cities, right? You get some very, very rich people that live there and very, very poor people that live there. Whereas in counties, everybody might just be kind of poor, but not really understand how poor they are. And so there's not a lot of standard to compare their own lives with. But when we lived in the DC area, my wife and I were living in a 1-bedroom apartment, seeing some of these people driving in their beautiful Teslas and these awesome cars, living in these $6 million homes, and we were like, damn, we'll never have that, right? So there's less strain in rural areas. Now the big 6 police agencies comprise about, they employ about 13% of all police officers in the country. So 6 police agencies, which are the NYPD, LAPD, Chicago, Philadelphia, Houston, Detroit. I can't believe Detroit, though. Ugh. Anyone ever been to Detroit? I'm not a fan of Detroit. I like Philadelphia, though. And if you look at the population density chart that I stole from, I think, the U.S. Census, you can see why. Right now, this is from 2010, but proportionally, there's not been a lot of change since then. But look, I mean, here is Philadelphia, NYPD. There's Detroit. Oh, no, wait, no, that's Detroit. Is that Detroit? No, that's Detroit. Yeah, that's Detroit over there. Sorry, this is like Chicago, Milwaukee, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, there's Chicago, Detroit, NYPD, Philadelphia PD, Houston, and LAPD right there. Bam! So you can see that no one ever lives in Wyoming, which is right there. Hey, have you guys ever driven through Wyoming? My wife and I make cross-country trips all the time, and Wyoming is the worst. It's just nothing. It's nothing. It's just like dirt. And same with Montana, too. Montana is pretty when you're up in like northwestern Montana, but the rest of it, you're like, what? What is this? This is not... Give me either grass or trees. Don't just give me weird rocks all the time, okay? South Dakota, quite nice. I actually really enjoy driving through South Dakota. It's pretty grasslands, and then when you get to the western part, like Custer area of South Dakota, you see some pretty mountains, and then you have Montana and Wyoming. Okay, sorry if you're from any of those states, but that should give you an idea why majority of crime occurs in those big 6 cities. Okay. So the 4 sheriff's models are full service. They do law enforcement, judicial, corrections. So that's kind of like where I lived in Vanderbilt County. They did all 4 of those things. What do you think Oswego does? I'm not going to tell you. You should look it up. Then you get a couple that only do law enforcement, but those are kind of rare. You get a couple that only do judicial, so they are only the bailiffs and such. And then you get a few that only do correctional and judicial, so they do everything but law enforcement. And those are the 4 categories of sheriff's models in the United States. So where do you think Oswego is? Actually, I think that's a question on one of the assignments for this class. So I'm not going to give you the answer. Then, in very rare occasions, you get county police departments. So where I lived for a while outside of Washington, D.C., a place called Fairfax County, they had both Fairfax County Police and Fairfax County Sheriffs, where the Fairfax County Police did all of the law enforcement and then the sheriffs did all of the back end, right? They were civil They were correctional judicial. And there they, so because essentially what happened in the Fairfax County is that it was such a large metropolitan area. So you have Washington, D.C., and then you have Arlington City, which is very, very small city right next to it in Arlington County. And then it's Fairfax County, which is a massive county right next to that. And a lot of people who worked in D.C. live in that area. So it created this massive metropolitan area in Northern Virginia there. And so there were a lot of little city police agencies, but over time, it was just easier to bring them all together into one police agency because those cities got so close to each other with suburban expansion that, you know, you cross a street and you hardly notice you just went from one zip code to another. It all just looks like it's part of the same big area. And so Fairfax County Police became its own police department. And it's one of the best police departments to work at, by the way. So look it up. They pay really well. You do have to have a college degree, but it is a really nice department. They're very focused on innovation and very, very forward-looking. Then you have special district police. So those are the ones that you guys know the most are probably university and airport police. However, in Washington, D.C., again, sorry I'm going on about the D.C. area, but so in Washington, D.C., you have the metro system, right? Kind of like the subway system like in New York. But you have the metro system, and the metro goes through the city of Washington, D.C., but then it also goes into Virginia, all the way to Dulles Airport, and into Maryland, to different cities within southern Maryland. And so if someone stabbed somebody in Virginia, hopped on the red line, going through D.C., stabbed someone else in D.C., and then rode that red line all the way into Maryland and then ran away, it would be a massive headache for like 2 counties in Virginia, D.C. Metro, D.C. Metro and for crying out loud, Maryland local police departments to all work together. So they created the Metro Transit Police. Okay, and so it's essentially resources from Washington, D.C., from Virginia, and from Maryland to just put police on that transit line. So if someone stabs somebody on the Metro Police or the transit police can then deal with that issue without having to worry about jurisdictional issues. So yeah. Then you have state law enforcement. Most states have a state police agency, but not all of them do. State police they have jurisdiction across the entire state. Most of them do highway patrols. And think about your own experiences getting caught by state police or seeing state police. It was most of the time on the highway. Just think if local police agencies had to police the highway, right? Just to be a pain in the butt, right? Some state police agencies will do both highway patrol and state investigations. Some will only do investigations. But for the most part, when there's like a really high profile crime in your state across different jurisdictions, the state investigative agency will come in and take care of running that investigation, making sure that different local agencies are communicating with each other effectively, and sort of take the lead on those. However, state agencies are very different between different states. It's one thing in Virginia, it's another thing in Indiana, it's another thing in New York, another thing in Maryland. Federal law enforcement is also slightly different. Most federal law enforcement agencies are not full service, meaning like you don't see FBI patrolling the streets. Actually, very few federal agencies have patrol, but some do, like Border Patrol, Supreme Court Police, just to name a few. What they mostly do is investigations and regulation. The FBI often will handle cases that spread across multiple jurisdictions, or like the DEA, right? They will deal with like drug trafficking that happens on a very large scale, right? So they're there for the really big picture stuff, is a way to think about it. And the federal law pretty much says exactly how these agencies will operate and what their jurisdiction is. And it's really something for a lot of you who are getting degrees in criminal justice, because for some unfortunate reason, not all police agencies, not all local police agencies in the United States are requiring you to have a degree. But if you have a degree, you have a pretty good chance of getting a job as a federal police officer. Many of my previous students have become park rangers, or worked at the Department of Justice, or have moved into the DEA and the State Department. So yeah, so there are options. Federal marshals is another one. Anyways, there are 17 large federal agencies that we're gonna quickly glance over. Not all 17, but there are 17 large federal agencies that you have probably heard of, right? Like ATF, DEA, FBI. And these 17 large agencies employ the lion's share of sworn federal agents, about 500 of them. And U.S. Customs and Border Patrol is the largest, which, by the way, they're still hiring. So go check it out on usajobs.gov. So after 9/11 happened, and I'm aware that some of you probably weren't even alive then, which makes me realize how old I am. But I remember where I was. I just asked someone to homecoming, and they said no. Yes, they said no. What they ended up figuring out was that a lot of different federal agencies and state agencies, local agencies, different police agencies had different bits of information that if you had put all that together, you would have known, oh my gosh, the Taliban wants to attack the United States. So George Bush creates or not George Bush, but he signs the Patriot Act, which did a lot of things. One of them, I mean, there's some things that people are annoyed about, but one of them is that it creates a platform for agencies to communicate with each other effectively. But another thing that George Bush did was that he restructured all of the federal agencies into two major departments: the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security. And so they comprise the majority of federal police agencies. If the FBI and the DEA are in the same big agency, then it'd be easier for them to communicate that way. So Department of Homeland Security, but think of Department of Homeland Security sort of as your defense, right? You got your ICE, you got CBP, you got FEMA, Secret Service, Coast Guard, TSA. And then DOJ is more of our offense. FBI, Marshals, ATF, who really screwed up Waco, DEA. The U.S. Marshals, by the way, the very first federal police agency. But yeah, these are all places where you can look for jobs. The Marshals are great, especially if you become like an air marshal. You sit on a plane, study for your master's degree. Okay, that is policing in America.